There. Okay. Now it's going. So we're on page 315 talking about aquatic food supplies. And probably the first thing I'd like to do here is see if we can find some aquatic farms. Aquatic farms. Uh-huh. Oh, I don't have it turned on. Yeah, you guys, good for you. Well, it's coming on. Aquatic farms pictures. Let's see what we get.
It's not turning on.
Yeah, it's coming on.
Oh, it's coming.
I mean, you've all driven by a cattle farm, a chicken farm, a pig farm, you've seen all of that. See, to me, raising chickens means you have a few chickens running around your yard. Then you go to Arkansas and you see these huge long buildings with big fans at the end where people raise chickens and sell them to Tyson Chicken Company that sells them all over America. No. And that's they have a processing plant that's just huge. And I guess if you go someplace where they process, where they raise all these chickens commercially, it's a whole different thing than raising them on your own. Got you, Drake.
Thank you.
So, is it coming up yet?
Yeah.
So we're talking about on page 315, aquatic food supplies, images of aquatic farms. What is this? Aquatic farming in Alaska? Oysters, clams, and mussels. Do you eat oysters, clams, and mussels? Yes?
My dad, well, we all in my family, like, we like octopus salad because we get octopus, like, Puerto Rico or something. And you can buy octopus, like, in a can. I think they are, like, even here in, like, the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
But since I live, like, basically by the beach, like, we live, like, close to the ocean. There's an old man that lives by the beach, and that's what he does. Like, I don't know how to say it. Fishes octopus, like, just like
he catches octopus,
yeah,
and he sells them,
yeah, and we
to people on shore.
Yeah, and we always go to his house, and my dad buys like a couple pounds of octopus, and they're fresh. It's better than the canned one.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Just like fresh tuna is better than canned tuna.
Yeah.
And Spam, I don't know what that's made from, but fresh meat is always tastier.
Spam is spam.
Let's go back and see if we can find some more aquatic farming.
Did you click on the other tab?
Well, let's see.
Click on the other tab.
Fishing. Hatcheries, aquatic farming. Well, we've already looked at that one. Come on, give me a different one. Where's the rest of my pictures?
Go. You have two tabs open, so go to the very top and click aquatic farms.
There.
Pictures.
Here?
No, the other one.
Here.
The other one. No. Up, up.
Up there?
You don't click that.
Where? Tell me where to click.
Okay, you have two tabs open, so this is where you get the pictures clicked.
Okay,
There.
click on this.
Yeah, and then you can X that.
And then Barefoot Aquatic Farms. What are those? Local businesses. Looks like they've got some little patties with, see that net where they're dragging it through there? Harvesting the fish out of their little pond. Let's see, we don't want any aquaculture. Let's click on that one, see what that one looks like. There's some cool pictures out here. Yeah. In southern Chile. Off in the ocean. They have actually built these big pens out there, and they raise fish inside these pens out in the ocean. It's cool stuff. Well, you'll have to go look at some of those pictures on your own. There. Maybe I'll just go Google something different. That'll help. I'll Google fish farms. Fish farms in Kansas? No. In Missouri?
There's nothing in Kansas.
Culver's Fish Farm, Wallace's Fish Farm, Hartley Fish Farm. So what kind of fish are they raising? Culver's Fish Farm, McPherson, Kansas. Well, what do you know? People out in McPherson are raising fish. Fish farms. Let's just go to fish farms. Fish farms. I don't want that. Fish farms in the ocean. Offshore aquaculture is an emerging approach to mariculture or marine farming, where fish farms are moved some distance offshore. They're positioned in deeper and less sheltered waters where ocean currents are stronger. They need the ocean current to sweep through their pens to take away the refuse so the fish have fresh water to get their oxygen. Pictures. There we go. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. There's some cool pictures. See those big pens out there? I mean, it's just cool stuff that people are going into the ocean. And you know why this is becoming so important? I mean, you say, well, aren't there fish out in the ocean? And these companies just go out there and they take these big nets and catch them and can them and sell them. Yes. But guess what's happening? The world's fish supplies are being depleted to where nature isn't restoring the aquatic food supply. So people are starting to build pens and raise their own, where they feed them and put them out there where the currents carry the waste away and keep bringing fresh water to them. It says on page 315, at the bottom of the page, humans harvested about 158 million tons of aquatic foods in 2006, primarily fish. Aquatic food comprised less than 2% of the world's daily calories and about 8% of its protein. So, what kind of fish do you like best? On page 317, above the page, oysters, squid, clams, octopus, lobster, crab, shrimp, herring, mackerel, anchovies, tuna, salmon, cod, haddock, sole. I'm thinking that I'll just take a hamburger when I look at that list. Does any of that just make your mouth water? Carla, does that octopus make your mouth water just thinking about eating it?
Where is it?
On the bottom of page 317, the four main groups of marine catch. Although Price Chopper sells fish on Friday, great big fish planks for about $3. It's pretty tasty stuff, and I think it's cod. And I try to eat healthy on Friday, so I stop and buy some, and then my wife fixes some vegetables to go with it. And I think, now that was a healthy lunch. And then within 2 hours, I'm hungry. And she says, what do you want? And I say, can you cook me a hamburger? Somehow this stuff just doesn't work for me. I'm just a beef man. And when I was in Maine, I went to a restaurant and ordered lobster. I thought, you have to eat lobster in Maine. And the lady said, well, if you're not used to eating it, we are already prepared for you, so you don't have to take it out of the shell yourself. I said, that'll work. And they brought it to me, and I'm chewing on it, and it tasted kind of rubbery. Kind of like octopus is a little rubbery. And I'm going, well, okay, I've eaten lobster, so now I can say I've done it. And the waitress walked up, she said, so what do you think? I can't lie to her, so I said, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Kansas City, where barbecue is king. And as I sit here and compare this lobster to barbecue brisket or to a T-bone steak, I'm sorry, but if you're ever in Kansas City, be sure and order some barbecue brisket and T-bone steak and see how it compares to lobster. And she would probably say, I prefer lobster, because she lives on the coast where they eat that. I prefer my beef. It talks about overfishing on page 318 and depletion, and how some nations have actually almost gone to war over this thing, because there's kind of a universal rule that up to 100 miles out or 200 miles out from your shore, those are your waters, and so other people shouldn't be fishing there. But does this surprise you? The fish kind of live close to shore, so people come in from other countries to harvest your fish, and nations get upset about that. There are international laws and regulations for fishing. Just like we have laws. I mean, if I raise cattle and I'm thinking, you know, there's just not enough grass here for all my cattle to eat, why don't I just turn my cattle loose and let them run through Raymore and Belton and eat people's lawns? It's like, no, you can't do that. You have to keep them fenced in. But I don't know if you realize this, but it used to be that when cattle drives would bring cattle up from Mexico and Texas to Kansas City to put on the trains to ship it back east to feed beef to all those people on the East Coast, that how did they feed those cattle while they were traveling up here? They would just eat the grass on the range. So the people who were selling cattle in Kansas City actually didn't like the fact that people built fences and made farms, because it interfered with the open range where they would feed their cattle. And while they're waiting for their cattle to be processed at the stockyard, down around Westport area, they would just mingle around there and just eat the grass. they called it range grass, where it was like it was supposed to be open country that didn't belong to anybody. And if you did own it, don't build a fence on it because we need it for cattle food. So it became a little, the cattlemen and the ranchers in that play, Oklahoma, the play kind of exaggerates some things, but still there was some friction going on there. On page 320, it talks about hunger and food security. Have any of you ever really been hungry?
Yes.
To the point to where your stomach inside was hurting,
Yeah.
Yep.
and you go to bed at night? That is not a fun feeling. And say, but there's no food to eat, so you don't have any choice about it. Here in America, I don't think we know what hunger is. If it's late at night and I said to my wife, I need a bowl of ice cream, and she said, we're out of ice cream, what could I do? Get in my car and go to the 24-hour Walmart?
Yeah.
And buy some ice cream and eat to my heart's content, even though it's too late at night? I mean, we just don't get hungry. Say, well, those of us who have the money to go buy the stuff, but if you don't have the money to go buy it, in fact, a lot of schools now are having children who come from home situations where they don't get enough food to eat, so they're packing little bags of food to send home with them on Friday after school to give them something to eat till they come back to school on Monday, where they'll have a breakfast and a little bit of a lunch, because somebody needs to feed these children. And if they're not being nourished, if they're malnourished, what? A person is malnourished, it says on page 320, when he or she has too few or too many nutrients. So, is our problem in the United States too few nutrients, or is our problem too many? Too many. And the government says we have an epidemic in obesity. That's the word they use for having too many nutrients. Eating too much of the wrong thing. A person is undernourished when hunger physically affects the person, often making it difficult for the body to function properly. And that's why undernourished children, they're doing things to feed them at school so they can learn more in their schoolwork and pay more attention and be more comfortable. And probably too, learn some things about how to eat healthy foods and how to satisfy their hunger in a proper fashion. And then hopefully as they go through school and graduate, they'll want to get jobs where they can afford to provide for themselves and their children down the road. It isn't like some parents can't provide for their children. It's just that they choose not to because they choose to spend their money on other things. Not everybody's that way, because some of the children just don't have food. And I think it's neat that the schools do that for them. It says on page 322, one of the biggest obstacles to food security is the use of farmland in poor countries for crops that do not feed the local population. In America's battle against drugs in America, they went to foreign countries where poppies were being raised and said to these farmers, how about if we give you some wheat, and then you can raise wheat to feed your family, as well as to sell some to your neighbors. And they started giving very productive strains of wheat to farmers in these foreign countries. And guess what happened? After they got them started raising wheat and they left, they came back a few years later and found out they had gone back to raising poppies. I mean, you can't eat them. They're just used for making cocaine. But why would they do that? Because they can make more money selling poppies to the cocaine dealers than they can make raising wheat. Yeah, but wheat's better for your society. Well, yeah, but I'm thinking about putting money in my pocket. Have you ever thought on page 322 of flowers as a cash crop? See, I'm thinking, so who buys flowers? Do you guys buy flowers? For Easter, our granddaughter brought us some flowers. And I thought, what's this all about? Oh, she lived in Russia for 8 years. In Russia, they give flowers. In other parts of the world, people give flowers away all the time. So there's a world market for flowers. It's just not as big here in the United States. But in other parts of the world, that's a big market. On page 324, it talks about unsuccessful land distribution. Well, on page 323, it talks about systems of land ownership can discourage production in many countries. Systems of land ownership reflect broad political and social inequalities. Hundreds of landless peasants have died in clashes with armed landowners and police in Brazil in recent years. In many countries, the landholding system is a holdover from the country's colonial period. Colonial governments replaced communal systems with systems of private property, and the distribution of property was highly inequitable. This created a class of large estate holders and another much smaller class, or a larger class of poor, landless, poor people. And probably the other struggle is between people owning their own land and people having a communal farm. And when we talked about raising gardens in the inner city, most of that is inner city people find some empty lots and say, guess what? Let's plant a garden. And we don't each have our own plot. We all work together to plant the big plot, and we share the produce that comes from it. But if I own my own land, then I can plant my own garden. And then I can do what I want with the stuff that I raise on it. Or, as my father did, he was a college graduate, but he wanted to be a farmer. But his father didn't own a farm, so it was going to be hard for him to be a farmer. So he just found somebody who owned some land who would rent him their farm. And all of my life, I lived on a rented farm. It wasn't until I was grown and left home that my father actually, I guess since he didn't have kids to feed anymore, he could save some money and go buy himself a little farm. And he bought one when he was older. But when I was younger, I lived on a, they call it leased, but it was really a rented farm. It was actually, the technical word in sociology books for me is my family was a sharecropper, because we paid the landowner 1/3 of the crop we raised for the privilege of living on the land. We didn't give him any of our chickens or any of our milk from our milk cows, but we paid him, gave him 1/3 of our wheat crop as rent for living there and raising wheat. And the idea behind the sharecropper, instead of paying him cash, is if we didn't have a wheat crop, then we didn't have to pay any cash to rent the land. He just took the same risk we did, and he got the same profit. When we had a big wheat crop, he made more money. When we didn't have much of a wheat crop, he made less, but he was willing to rent the farm like that. And my grandfather lived like that his entire life, and my father grew up that way, so he didn't have a problem with living that way. But when I was taking some sociology classes at the university, I found out that sociology professors in major universities have a bad attitude about sharecroppers. Like there's something wrong with them. And I'm thinking, hey, it's a good way to do business if you don't have the money to own the farm. And in my grandfather's case, he could have owned a farm, but he decided not to because he saw people who went to the bank and borrowed money to buy a farm, and then they had a crop failure and the bank took their farm and left them with nothing. So he thought he's better off just to rent a farm his entire life. In Mexico, it says unsuccessful land redistribution. Mexico demonstrates how communal land ownership can restrict productivity. They took the land away from these big landowners and said, here's the communal farm, we'll all work together, and that wasn't very productive. And that's been tried in other countries as well. Socialism says we'll all work together on this farm, and then we'll all take some produce home, and everybody will be happy. And capitalism says, no, we'll take this land and divide it up into little plots, and each of you have your own plot, and you raise your own stuff. And here in America, we practice each person having his own plot of land. Even if you rent the land, or you're a sharecropper, you still have land that you can live on and raise your garden and raise your crops and raise your livestock and animals and things you want to eat, and then raise some cash crops that you sell to make money to do other things. But in other countries, it's like, no, we want everybody working on these big government-owned farms, and then we'll take care of providing for you. I understand why in Russia people are open to socialistic leadership. If you go there to visit, all of this, I mean, the city, okay, in the wintertime, have you ever heard of people getting cold because the power and light company turned off their electricity, or the gas company shut their gas off because they didn't pay their bill? Well, in Russia, nobody gets their gas shut off because Russia doesn't charge you for the gas. If they do, it's just a minimal amount, but the city decides when to turn the heat on and when to turn it off, and they heat the whole city. The subways and everywhere, they heat everything, and it's just a government benefit because it's a socialistic country. But the reason is because Russia has natural gas supplies. Their natural gas supplies are greater than any nation on the face of the earth. So they can easily provide free heat for everybody. And if you live in Moscow where it gets cold, it's nice to have that free heat. So it's a popular notion there that we let the government take care of this so we don't have to do it ourselves. Gotcha, Adrian. And I can see why that would appeal to people, because then you don't have to worry about paying for it. So I see some benefits to the socialistic approach and some weaknesses, and I see some benefits to the capitalistic approach and some weaknesses. You just have to, hopefully, whichever system you're living in, maximize the strengths and minimize the weaknesses. On page 326, it asks a question. Why do some rich countries subsidize agriculture? Did you know in America we subsidize farmers? And by the way, that's why we have so much food. Because the government wants to make sure that the people who raise the food for farmers in America are secure enough if they have a crop failure or something happen, that we'll take care of them because we enjoy the fact that they feed America. It talks about in Saudi Arabia, lots of rich countries do that. They subsidize agriculture. And part of it is that it makes us to be a country that has a huge food supply. On page 328, it talks about food supplies in the future. About 37% of all irrigation water in the world is actually taken up by crops. The rest is lost in runoff, evaporation, or leakage. Technological advances in irrigation could reduce the percentage of loss. Have any of you read anything about what the nation of Israel has done to make the desert bloom in the former Holy Land? They have learned to irrigate with just a little bit of water, and it's called drip irrigation. I've seen some people in America try it. I mean, when you see people irrigating crops, have you ever seen those big things that in a circle where when it's turned on there's water flying everywhere? Well, basically what it's saying is that about 70% of the water is wasted. In Israel, they would have that water going through little pipes where at each one of the plants it would be dripping some water out, just enough to feed the plant, so that it doesn't use near as much water to provide water for the plants to grow. And they've been so successful there that people around the world have mimicked what they're doing and have used their technology and borrowed from it. I guess the reason we keep wasting so much water is because we have so much water in this country. We're not running out of water yet. Now, in California, they had a big, long drought and they were running out of water. But now this year, all the snow came back, and so they've got their reservoirs all filled up again. In Kansas and South Dakota, the underground aquifer that they were using to irrigate has dropped so much in the level that people are worried that the irrigation is going to dry up in western Kansas and Nebraska and South Dakota. And if it does, they'll go back to what they had before, which was dryland farming. But it could be that they'll say, we'll just have to change the way we irrigate so we don't waste so much water. But in the meantime, most of us who live in this part of the world waste water because we can, because we have so much of it. I mean, just drive up across the river and what do you see? There's all this water coming down the river. We take out what we need, and there's still plenty left for the people down in Jefferson City and down in St. Louis and on down to the ocean. So because we live someplace where there's lots of water, we're not that concerned about it. Even during a drought, the Missouri River still brings plenty of water to Kansas City. On page 331, it talks about the scientific revolution in agriculture, biotechnology, and genetically altered crops. Have any of you heard people talk about there are no genetically altered crops in this food we're serving? Because some people have said, I think those genetically altered crops that make them more productive maybe are harmful to us and we shouldn't be eating them. So on page 332, it talks about resistance to biotechnology. GM, genetically modified foods. And you'll just have to make up your own mind about that. I do know that when it comes to tomatoes, genetically modified tomatoes that make it easier to produce and harvest tomatoes and sell them in the grocery store, that can keep tomatoes for selling around $1.50 to $2 a pound, have made the tomatoes not taste as good as the fresh ones do. And every year I think I'm going to plant some tomatoes and raise them in my garden. It's like, why should I? I have 3 neighbors who raise tomatoes and sell them for 50 cents a pound. So every day they go out and pick them and put them on a table. You just pull in their driveway, put it on their scale, pay them 50 cents a pound, and take it home. And I'm thinking as long as I've got 3 neighbors who are doing that, then I'll let them raise the tomatoes and I'll spend my time watching my grandsons play baseball. Climate change and food security. Can you see where the climate can change to where you can't produce the food that you used to produce to feed people, and that could cause a problem? On the other hand, in some places, where in Iceland, where they're experiencing global warming, they're able to raise crops where in the years past they couldn't because it was too cold, and they're beginning to benefit agriculturally from global warming. I mean, the globe is warming up. There's no question about that. Some people sound like all global warming is bad, and it isn't necessarily. I mean, there's some bad dimensions to it. There's also some good dimensions to it. I mean, think of how much money we spend keeping ourselves warm in the wintertime. A little bit of global warming would save on our heating bill. Yeah, but it makes our air conditioning bill go up. Have all of you lived all of your life with air conditioning?
No.
Okay, see, some of you people who've had air conditioning all your life, you need to talk to people who lived without it. It is possible to live without air conditioning. Yes, it is. Even in a hot climate, it's possible to live without air conditioning. You just learn how to cope with it. Chapter 9, Earth's Resources and Environmental Protection. When all of you opened your book up to page 339 and saw that picture on page 338, what is that? Salt flats in Bolivia? These deposits are the world's richest known source of lithium. How many of you use lithium on a daily basis? You go, lithium? Isn't that what my friend who's, what is that condition where you're manic and depressive, bipolar? Isn't that what he takes? Yeah, I think it is. But that's not what I'm talking about. Do any of you have anything with a battery in it? Do you have anything that has to be recharged? Okay, if it has to be recharged, it has a battery in it. If it has a battery in it and you're not aware of it, it's probably so small, it's a lithium ion battery. And let's see. Let's turn this back on. Let's go down here and click on this one. This page has a problem loading. Is there a reason? Go to your, open a new tab or go to my start page. Let's see what happens. Well, I don't care about that. Well, let's just Google history of lithium batteries. There we go. Chemists worked on lithium batteries in 1912. But it wasn't until the 1970s that the first examples became available to consumers. History of lithium-ion batteries. Length 1,700 words, 5 double-spaced pages. Apparently they're selling this or something. Rechargeable batteries accelerated as the world transitioned to instruments enabled by silicon microchip technology from those bulky electrical components. Do you remember the first portable phones, how big they were? Yeah, what's happened? The first computers, how big they were, and now they're so small. In the 1990s, lithium batteries became available in the 1990s, offering higher energy density. The technology won out over nickel hydride batteries. Advantages of lithium rechargeable batteries, and it gives you a whole bunch of advantages. And this stuff that you see harvested here, that's what's used to make these batteries. And the reason I'm pointing that out to you is because this chapter talks about Earth's resources and environmental protection, but Earth's resources, and it's pretty obvious that that picture of lithium there is important to all of us, because if there was no more lithium and they could make no more lithium batteries, and your lithium batteries died in whatever your appliances that you're using, and you couldn't buy replacement batteries, you would be without your watch, your wristwatch, without your phone, without your tablet. You understand what would happen if we ran out of lithium? No, I think if they ran out of lithium, they'd think of something else to make batteries out of. Yes, they probably would. But in the meantime, we better appreciate the lithium that we can buy from Bolivia and understand that that's a valuable natural resource to us now that several years ago wasn't that big a deal. In fact, when you look at page 342, it talks about the economics and natural resources, where it talks about supply and demand, and as long as there's plenty of lithium, the batteries will be pretty cheap. If we start using it all up and there's a shortage of it, then it's going to get very expensive. It's just a supply and demand thing. My wife has some kind of little instrument that she uses to check her blood sugar because she's a little diabetic. And the instrument she uses, they quit making it, and the company that made it said they weren't going to make it anymore. So she couldn't buy any more of these little discs to put inside it to do the readings. Well, you could, because some people heard that the company was going to quit making them, so they bought a bunch of the disc up, and discs that used to sell for like a disc with 10 of them on there that would sell for maybe $3 is now being sold for $300. And I said to Nina, it's time to find a new instrument to check your blood sugar. So we just go shopping for something else because of supply and demand kind of thing. And we found something else that we can use. It's not exactly as convenient as what she had, but like she said, who wants to pay $300 for a disc that normally costs about $3? Substitutability, that's the ability to substitute something if there becomes a shortage. There's a shortage of what she needed, so she found something else. No, that's not quite the same because she's still getting strips to check her blood sugar. She's just getting them from a different company. Here, have any of you ever seen a house being built where they're nailing wood 2x4s together? Have any of you ever seen them building a building where they've got stacks of wooden 2x4s and they're nailing them together? You've never stopped to look at that? That doesn't intrigue you? Have you ever seen a building going up where there are stacks of metal and they're screwing it together and they're putting them the same distance apart as the old 2x4s, and it's going, whoa, they're building this building out of metal rather than 2x4s. Why are they doing that?
Stronger.
It's stronger, and when there was a shortage of wood, it was cheaper. Now that the wood now that we've kind of got some of our wood supplies replenished, it's not cheaper, but it's stronger and more fire resistant. So they go, hey, I like the idea of using those metal studs, they call them, but building some, and let's see, what else could you substitute? You say, well, what if it costs too much to have metal to build a house and have wood to build a house? What else could you build your house out of? Have any of you ever seen a house built out of concrete blocks? Have any of you ever seen a house built out of brick? Have you seen a house built out of stone? I was in a guy's home out in Kansas one time. So cool. He lived in a part of Kansas where there's lots of rocks in the soil. So what do you think they did on their farm? His ancestors who homesteaded that years ago. They went out every time a rock surfaced. They would pick it up and carry it up near the house. And they just kept adding to the house, adding rooms by taking these rocks and stacking them together and putting mortar in between them. And he's got a whole house built out of rock that came out of the soil that around. And of course, as you pick the rocks up and build the house, then you've made the soil more productive where you can use it for crops. What if you live someplace where you don't have any rocks, you don't have any bricks, you don't have any wood, you don't have any steel? Well, that's what a sod house was when people settled out on the prairie and said, the best thing we have is cut slabs of sod, stack it up, and then make a house out of it. That's our wall. And then actually they would put timbers for the roof and then cover the roof with sod and let grass grow out of it. So they just kind of had their, kind of like a little underground house up above ground. And I suppose that's another substitute. You could just dig a hole in the ground and live there. Have any of you ever been in a home that was made inside a cave? Now that's some school. I mean, sometimes just go Google what kind of homes people live in, and there are some places in real hot parts of the earth where people have made homes inside caves where they have these vents going up through the top, so cool air is constantly flowing through their house, keeping it comfortable. It's just the idea that you can substitute things. Let's see, if we ran out of oil and you couldn't drive your car anymore, how would you get around town?
Ethanol.
With ethanol? And so what if they said there's no more ethanol? You park your car and say,
Teslas.
it's time to get a bicycle. It's time to start walking. Could you walk from here to Walmart? Now, see, some of you are saying yes, and others are, I don't know. See, I grew up in the country where my friend lived 2 miles from my house. So if I wanted to go see my friend, I walked 2 miles. Or I rode my bicycle 2 miles. We lived at one time less than a mile from school. I think it was only half a mile from school. And I said to my wife, the reason I bought a house close to school is so that you and the girls could walk to school and we only have to own 1 car. Well, I discovered something real fast. I married a city girl, and if there's not a bus stop 2 blocks away, you need a car or a ride to get to where you're going. I'm going, no, you girls can walk. No, we can't. They just couldn't envision walking that far. So I had to go buy a car for them to drive. And I found a cheap car. What was it? It was an American Motors Gremlin. Ugliest looking thing you ever saw. But it was cheap because nobody wanted to buy them. And they drove it to school, and all of the kids at school made fun of it. But I only paid $300 for it. And they drove it to school for 4 years of high school. Then when my daughters were old enough to drive, they said, can we get a car? And I said, you can drive the Gremlin. You'd be surprised how quick they got jobs and earned money to buy their own car. Because they didn't want to drive that ugly Gremlin. Are natural resources being depleted? Yes, they are. The people who say we're running out of oil so we won't have gasoline anymore don't count on the fact that they keep discovering new oil fields off the coast of Alaska, off the coast of South America. So maybe we're some of our non-renewable resources, that would be fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas. Okay, you understand that we need oil and gas. Well, we need oil to make gasoline to make our cars go. Do any of you use natural gas at your house? Or do you even know? Does your furnace run on natural gas? Do any of you use coal at your house? My grandfather used to have loads of coal delivered to his house that he would burn in his kitchen cook stoves and burn in the stove to keep the house warm in the wintertime. Did you know that all of us in this room depend on coal? Have you ever seen those big trains of coal coming into town? Have you ever seen a whole string of coal cars piled up with it, going down a railroad track? Well, they're coming from Wyoming, where most of the coal in our country is out there. There's enough coal to last for another 100 years for us to keep burning coal in our country. And where are they taking all that coal? Oh, you don't know. Well, if the coal wasn't delivered this week, and the Hawthorne Electric Power Plant, anyone know where the Hawthorne Electric Power Plant is? Oh boy, we better take a look at this. Hawthorne, Hawthorn. Hawthorne Bank? No. Hawthorne Power Plant. Pictures. Kansas City. What happened there?
Click X.
What did I do?
Click the big X up in the left corner.
Up here?
Wrong way. That way. Go. Keep going over.
Keep going over. Here?
That. Yes.
Get rid of that one. All right. KCP&L. See more images of the Hawthorne Power Plant. Let's look at some images. Maybe you'll recognize it. Have any of you seen any of these pictures? When you drive across the river, going to Worlds of Fun, off to the right is that big smokestack with the red and white stripes on it. You never ask, what is that over there? That's the Hawthorne Power Plant.
Our parents always told us.
What?
Our parents always told us it was the bunny factory from VeggieTales.
No way. That's so funny.
Have all of you seen that? You say, nope, I just drive across the river and I keep my eyes on the road. Crossing that bridge, I don't look to the right or the left.
I don't think I've crossed the river.
Well, it's up there. Let's go back. Why are we talking about the Hawthorne Power Plant? There's where it's located. Right up here next to the Missouri River in Kansas City. Oh, let's go Hawthorne Power Plant. Whoops, that was a bad idea, wasn't it? See if it comes back. No, it doesn't. Hawthorne Power Plant. T-H-O-R-N. Hawthorne Power Plant. Fire. That'll get your attention. Explosion, huh? Images. Where's a picture of the fire at the Hawthorne Power Plant? Chernobyl. Now that's a power plant destruction there. You've all heard about Chernobyl?
No.
In Ukraine?
No.
By the way, that was a nuclear power plant that went into meltdown mode. Why would the Russians build their nuclear power plant in Ukraine instead of in Russia? Let's see. If it's going to blow up, it doesn't blow up in the face of people in Moscow, it blows up in the face of people in Ukraine. Oh, do you know what a nuclear power plant is used for? Do you know what they produce at a nuclear power plant? What?
No clue.
Something we all use every day. Electricity. Electricity. The Hawthorne Power Plant belongs to KCP&L. Does that tell you something? You don't get a bill from KCP&L? I get one every month. I live in an all-electric home. Now you see why I know about the Hawthorne Power Plant and when something goes wrong down there? Because the electric wires to my house are hooked up to the Hawthorne Power Plant, and the Hawthorne Power Plant is burning coal from Wyoming to generate electricity for my house. The electricity here on campus, Hawthorne Power Plant. Well, actually, I should say, let's just Google KCP&L. KCP&L. KCP&L, let's go back. KCP&L, okay, let's go back up here. Let's start over. You guys need to learn something about where your stuff comes from. KCP&L energy sources. All right. Well, I don't see the one I saw at home here. All right, let's see what this has to say. And Westar Energy warns customers about imposters. KCP&L. Let's see what this says. Our balanced there you go. Our balanced portfolio for KCP&L. The blue is how much of the electricity comes from coal. The gray is how much of the electricity comes from wind farms. Have any of you driven down the road and seen a wind farm? That's producing electricity. The green is from natural gas. Did you know that the largest supply of natural gas in the United States is in Kansas? And they've tapped those natural gas wells and they pipe that stuff up here. 8% is from oil, 11% is from nuclear. Did you know there's a nuclear power plant close by to Kansas City where they generate electricity with smashing atoms with nuclear power? And if that nuclear reactor isn't handled properly, it can melt down and have a disaster like they had in Chernobyl. But most of the electricity I get comes from coal. And I did some research on this just to see. My question was, how much coal does it take at the Hawthorne plant to keep electricity coming to about 1 million people in the Kansas City area. And it said that those trains that bring those cars full of coal to Kansas City from Wyoming are about 120 trains, 120 cars long make a train, and one train has enough coal to produce electricity for about 4 or 5 days. So that means we burn 120 cars of coal about every 5 days to keep the lights on, the air conditioner going, and all of your little appliances running. So we need that coal. Now, we're trying to diversify because we're using some wind energy, and we're using more nuclear and some natural gas. But coal is still the biggest part of it. And the Hawthorne plant, now KCP&L, if you research it, they've turned some of their plants into natural gas plants, and it shows here. So some of the old coal plants have been converted to natural gas, and we're also getting energy from wind and from nuclear. And you probably ought to read about some of this stuff in terms of where you live to learn what's going on. Say, well, what if they just shut down the coal and said, we don't have that much electricity, Tom, so we're going to monitor how much electricity you use? And in fact, we could cut the electric use in half if we just turned the electricity off 12 hours a day. So which 12 hours of the day would you want your electricity turned off at your house? If your electricity goes off for 12 hours, what happens to the stuff in your refrigerator and your freezer? I mean, do you understand how dependent we are on this stuff?
In Gambia, they turn the electricity on and off whenever they want. It's very irregular.
And I decided some years ago that because I live in an all-electric home, if we start having electric shortages, I need to either buy me a generator that runs on gasoline or propane, and then get a big propane tank and put in my backyard, or I need to buy a wind generator and put out in my pasture, or I need to buy some solar panels to collect sun's energy to provide electricity for my house. But since my house is all electric, I don't need any natural gas, but I do need electricity to keep things going. So I've had to research my options, saying if it comes to this. And have you ever noticed when there's a storm in Kansas City and the power fails because of all the tree limbs falling down, that often people are out at the hardwares buying these generators to produce electricity to at least keep their refrigerator and their freezer from all their foods that they have stored from spoiling. But fortunately, I'm an all-electric home in a part of the city where all the utilities are underground, so you don't see the lines up there where the tree limbs can break the lines because it's all underground. The only thing that happens is every now and then somebody's out digging a trench and they hit the power line and our electricity goes off, but usually the power and light company has it back up in a couple of 3 hours. Those are non-renewable resources. You understand? The coal is non-renewable. You can't make any more of it. The wind, hey, it's renewable. And nuclear is non-renewable. And oil is non-renewable. Natural gas is non-renewable. Talk about renewable sources. I know a pastor up in Iowa who decided when he became a pastor of a church in southeastern Iowa that he was going to do his homework, and he researched how much land he would have to own to raise enough trees to where he could harvest trees on a continual basis. So he bought an area that already had timber on it. He cut some trees down to make firewood to heat his house with wood and to cook with wood. And so then he cuts down trees, and then where he cuts them down, he plants some more. And by the time he's gone all the way around his property and come back to where he had cut those trees years ago, some new trees have grown up to where he has new firewood. So he replenishes his firewood, and his utility bill in the wintertime is like $12 a month for electricity to run the fans to blow the air through his house. That's the heat's created by burning wood. Does that sound like a cool idea? You should see this pile of wood he has outside his house. And who cuts all that wood up and splits all that wood so he can burn it in his fireplace in the house and in his stove? He does. And I watched him do that one day, and guess what I concluded? I'm going to stay in my all-electric home as long as they'll let me. That looks like way too much work. And you girls have lived places where they don't provide electricity all the time.
Oh, anytime.
And they turn it on and they turn it off, and it comes and goes. And that was true in Brazil with a friend of mine who was a missionary there. That we take for granted, don't we? That you always, the power goes out, everybody going, wait a minute, my electricity's off, fix it immediately. Well, it's going to take a while. We had a big storm to get to it. And just saying that we all depend on the electric company to keep giving us electricity, and most of us use electricity for things that we all need all the time. On page 346, it talks about disposal and recycling of solid waste. How do you get rid of the trash at your house? You put it out at the curb once a week, right? And a truck comes and hauls it away. Do you know where the truck takes it?
The trash place.
Where's the trash place? My aunt used to live across the highway from the trash place. Have any of you driven down 71 highway going to downtown Kansas City and looked off to the right to see a great big hill?
Yeah.
That's got little pipes coming out of it? Okay, that used to be a big hole in the ground where they hauled away a bunch of gravel, a bunch of rock. And once they got all the rock out they wanted, they turned it into a trash dump where all the garbage trucks would dump things. And once it got the hill of garbage got so high, the city said no more trash there. So they covered it over with grass and put pipes to vent it. Up in Minnesota, you know what they did with some of their trash mounds? They turned them into ski slopes. Have any of you driven south on 71 highway and ever see garbage trucks just lined up, turning off and going west out in the middle of nowhere? Well, look off to the west when you're driving down the road. It's like you're a dangerous person to ride with. You look around way too much when you're driving. But look off to the west and you'll see a great big mound of dirt. That's where all of these little cities are having their trash hauled to. It has to go somewhere. This is pretty sad. You know what New York City used to do with their trash? They would put it in a big barge. They would drag the barge out into the ocean. And what would they do? Open the bottom of the barge and drop it all in the ocean. How sad is that? That is so sad. Let's see. Page 350 talks about reserves of oil, natural gas, and coal. And see, if we don't have oil where I can drive my car, I could probably learn to get around with a bicycle. But we better have coal and natural gas to keep my electricity on, because I would be in serious trouble without electricity. Can you imagine us trying to teach class? All of our online students would be gone. and you couldn't go to the internet and check your grades and do your homework and answer your questions. So we need coal and natural gas and nuclear energy to keep electricity going. Oh, maybe I should put that up here. Nuclear, U-C-L-E-A-R, power plants. Oh, I don't have it turned on. You ought to see where I'm getting this stuff so you can look at it on your own. Nuclear power plants in Nebraska, in the U.S. Let's look at them in the U.S. Whoa! Here we are right here in Kansas City with a nuclear power plant that operates out in Kansas, over in Missouri, up in Nebraska, down in Arkansas. Did all of you know? And you people in Texas, did you know you have 2 nuclear power plants in Texas? And what's out in West Texas? Have you been to West Texas to see where they're building all those farms with windmills to collect wind energy to make electricity? There's some guy used to be in the oil industry who decided that with the oil depletion in Texas, he's going to go to West Texas where the wind blows a lot and build these wind farms where you harvest the wind and turn it into electricity. People in Illinois, they are really dependent on nuclear energy. And people on the East Coast, if we had a Chernobyl here in the United States, you know what? The people who promote nuclear energy say we could not have a Chernobyl here. What happened in Chernobyl couldn't happen here because we have too many safeguards in place. It's like, well, maybe, maybe not. This nuclear power plant, you say, well, still, it's not that close to Kansas City. No, but this one right up here in Nebraska, guess what? It's right close to the river. So if the radioactivity from the power plant spilled over into the river, and the water coming through the water coming through the Kansas City water system was radioactive, and it came into your house, and you turn the tap on, and someone goes with their Geiger counter, and they go, guess what? Your water is highly radioactive.
With a glass of water.
You go, what? Say, well, they had a nuclear spill up there in Nebraska at that nuclear power plant. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but just be aware of where this stuff is. And again, what do we get from these nuclear power plants? Electricity. How much of our life depends on electricity?
A lot.
What could you do without electricity?
Read.
Only when the sun's shining and you're outside where you say, turn the lights on so I can read. It's like, no, the lights, you go, the lights use electricity?
Unless you have candles.
Have any of you ever tried to read with a candle?
Yep.
Well,
Of course.
It's really fun, huh?
Yes.
No. Have any of you tried to read with a flashlight?
Yes.
And then your flashlight does what?
Dies.
Runs out of batteries.
That means it's time to stop reading.
So you say, I'll get some more batteries. There are no more batteries. Okay, I'll see you on Friday. We'll finish this chapter up then.
We gotta give it